Welcome to the Friday edition of the Southeastern 14 podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Blake Lovell joins me as he does every day. Blake, kind of a slow news time, but let's start with baseball last night. Boy, Georgia went to Vanderbilt. It was not what we expected. I think the Bulldogs have hit another ball out of Hawkins Field as we sit here talking.
Yeah, they did had plenty of those, didn't they? That was a wild game. I think you could tell, obviously, from the first inning when Georgia scored three in the top, but you could sort of tell. I think that immediately it was going to be an interesting game, just based off of that. But then, as you said, I mean, they scored 11 runs in the final three innings from there, and Vanderbilt with 4 errors, and just was not your usual number one team in the country type game for Vanderbilt. And I mean, I guess at some point you knew they were going to have a strange game like that, but certainly I think when Kumar Rocker's on the mound, that's something you probably don't expect just in terms of the way that game played out. Of course, that was mostly for him just to, I don't know. I mean, it's just one of those, like we said, we know throughout the span of a baseball season where there's so many games played, you're going to have some weird ones, and that was certainly one of those for them.
Tim Corbin said something after that game last night that I found humorous. I don't think he found it humorous, but he said, Georgia had machine guns and we had squirt guns.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's about right. I mean, yeah, when you think about it, I mean, you watched how many, like you said, how many balls flew out of the stadium, and it was just boy. Again, I think just watching it early on, like you sort of got that sense, because obviously we don't see a team come in and score 3 runs the top of the first, right off the bat against obviously a pitcher like that, or pretty much against Vanderbilt period this year. So I think you could tell pretty early that this could be one of those kind of wild type games. So
yeah, well, Kumar Rocker gave up 3 home runs, 2 of them in his last inning of work. That is more than he'd given up in his entire career put together. I think coming into the game, I think he'd given up 2 home runs total for his career. He gave up 3 in a game. Georgia hit 4 off Grayson Moore in the ninth. And it was interesting, Garrett Blaylock, who started at Vanderbilt, has started his career there. He did not start games there, but he started his career at Vanderbilt in 2019, I think. But anyway, it might have been 2018, but he hit 2 out of there last night. Connor Tate, who's a really good player, has been a very underrated hitter for them. I don't think we've talked about him at all on the podcast. Hit 2. They've got some really good young players. Corey Collins, who folks I've talked to around that program really feel like he's got a lot of potential. He's the guy who hit the first one off of Rocker last night to start the game. There were no outs, and he hit a 3-run bomb in the first. Ben Anderson, who's their leadoff guy, who's been comped to Brett Butler, the former Braves and Giants outfielder and Dodgers outfielder, who is an elite on-base guy. Anderson hit 1 last night. But I watched that lineup. Georgia has always developed pitching ever since Scott Strickland's been there, once he had a couple of years to get his recruits there. But the hitting has been the question for that bunch, but that's a young lineup. And I'll be interested to see if that really sparks Georgia and gives that bunch some confidence. I think that's a regional caliber team, but as we have discussed over and over, somebody in this league that's a good team is going to not make the NCAA tournament because you got to play this gauntlet of a schedule. And I'm wondering if this will be the thing that can get Georgia's season, I don't want to say turned around because they're 19-10. They've had a good year, but maybe give them that boost that they need to get to the NCAA tournament, I guess would be a better way to put it.
Yeah, certainly an impressive performance. And I think what you just mentioned, it's about scheduling, right? That's what we always talk about. And I mean, Georgia's next 3 series, Kentucky, Missouri, and Auburn. There's a chance to make up some ground there. I mean, there's a chance to rack up some wins, I think, with those 3 teams. I mean, we've obviously talked about Missouri struggles. We've talked about Auburn, not really knowing what you're going to get from them. We've said it so many times about Kentucky. They're still one of those teams that maybe you don't know exactly what to make of just yet, even though we are this deep into the season. So, I mean, there's an opportunity. I mean, let's say, they win one of these final 2 here against Vanderbilt. They win the series, and then you're talking about going into 3 series against Kentucky, Missouri, and Auburn, having a lot of confidence. And, obviously you wrap up the season with a pretty tough slate against Arkansas, Florida, and Ole Miss. But there really is probably over the next 3 weeks some really potential there for Georgia to rack up some wins. And like we said, I mean, if they were to come out of the series with, a victory, another one here, and maybe, I mean, obviously, I don't think any of us expect the sweep, but if they can win another one, come out of this one 2-1, go into these next three series with a lot of momentum, a lot of confidence, that could be a big step in the right direction for them. So.
Yeah, and they've got a midweek game, and they were Clemson too at Foley Field, which is a chance to boost the RPI
and then Georgia
a little
Tech.
bit. Yeah, that one too. I mean, so that team sitting here at 27 in the RPI this morning. Yeah, let's go hypothetical. Okay, let's say Georgia gets one more in Nashville. That makes that team 5-7. Let's say it goes. Oh, let me think of what is realistic here. Let's say this may be a little optimistic because it's just hard to win against SEC teams. But if Georgia goes 6-3 the next 3 weekends, so at that point that would be 11 and what? 11-10?
I think so.
Heading into the final 3 series, if you can just get one game each series,
yeah,
you're 14-16. You're going to make the NCAA tournament with that schedule.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Frankly, even if you lose the next 2 at Vandy, I think 13-17 gets them in this year. Let me check strength of schedule because that's going to be part of it too. And of course, that's only going to shoot up. Okay, they are. Oh, good grief! Strength of schedule. They're already 17. So I mean, I would have to think that by the time they're done, they're probably top 10. I think 13-17 this year get you a bid. But it might depend on what happens in Hoover. Like if you go down there and go over, then maybe. But I would have to think with all the metrics and everybody knowing how tough the league is, I would think that Georgia would be on the right side of the bubble without knowing anything else.
Yeah, because, I mean, like we said, you still got 2 games here against Vanderbilt. Then you've got those stretch of games, like we said, against SEC teams who right now, like I said, Kentucky, Missouri, Auburn. But you got Arkansas, Florida, Ole Miss, and you've got the 2 games with Georgia Tech. So you play one April 27th, you play the other one May 18th. So you're really going to finish the season playing majority of your games against top 15 teams. And again, that's where you have the luxury of playing, potentially a Georgia Tech team who stays in that range too, and gets 2 games against them. So I think that's certainly a boost too, if from a scheduling standpoint, probably not from an actual wanting to play that many tough teams, but you know what you're getting into in the SEC. So they're one that kind of had the start to the schedule, a little bit easier than what it's going to look like at the very back end. But hey, that's what we talk about too. I mean, if they're able to really build some momentum here, let's say they win this series. I don't know. At this point, they've got an opportunity probably to sweep one of those series, whether against Missouri, Auburn, someone like that. And then, that's where you go into those last games with some confidence, knowing that it is the toughest part of your schedule, but at least maybe you've been able to make up some ground and be able to, have your confidence boosted just by beating some of these other teams to where, on the flip side of that, if you play it the opposite way and you play all the tough teams up front and you just really struggle and you have no confidence whatsoever, then maybe you come out and drop a game to Missouri or Auburn or someone like that. So I think it really sets up nicely for them in terms of not just the potential to get to the tournament, but just maybe from a psyche standpoint too, to where they've got some potential to really rack up some confidence here over these next 3 weeks. And then you go into those last, 2 and a half, 3 weeks or so with a ton of confidence against some of the best teams in the league.
I don't know that I particularly believe this is where this is headed. In fact, I don't. But Vanderbilt started to look a little bit wobbly the last 3 games. It wins 5-4 in Baton Rouge in Game 3 last Saturday of that series. And we've talked about Game 3 pitching being an issue for the Commodores. It gets a 5-4 win over Tennessee Martin on Tuesday that I don't think Tim Corbin was super happy about. And, of course, last night was just an unmitigated disaster. And by the way, we haven't mentioned the final. That was 14-2 last night. And again, that game at Vanderbilt. So let's reset a little bit just as a what could go wrong here kind of thing for Vandy. You're now in a spot, if you're Vandy, where you've got Cooper Davis, who's your starting left fielder, who hit himself in the face with the foul ball the first series of the year. He really has not been the same hitter ever since, and now he has got a hamstring issue. Those can be tricky and take a few weeks to recover from. He was not on the 30-man roster last night. Isaiah Thomas who is a really, really great right fielder for them. He strikes out a lot, but he's very athletic and just got probably one of the 5 best raw power bats in this league. He is out now. He's not on the 30 this weekend. He's got a groin pull. Those can be tricky. They've already had Tate Colwick, the starting second baseman, who's having a really nice year. He's down for several more weeks. I don't think we'll see him till May at the earliest. And so you look at that team, and all of a sudden it's down 3 starters. Kumar Rocker has not looked as dominant his last couple of starts after that performance in Missouri where he threw a ton of pitches. Now, Rocker last night was getting the velo up to 94, 95 again. I don't think it's really going to be an issue. I wonder the way Georgia was getting swings off him. And Rocker does at times get hit a little bit. I wonder if there was maybe pitch tipping involved or something there. I don't know the issue. But point is now, and I think Game 3 starting pitching, that's now a TBA. I don't know if they know what they're going to do in that spot. So I'm not saying Vanderbilt is ripe just to fall off the map here. I'm not at all. I still think that's the best team in the country. But there are some issues that are kind of developing there for that team, too.
Well, and the big thing last night, too, again, like we said, aside from the pitching and the errors, but my goodness, you probably know the number, and I'm sure I'd look back and find it, but I mean, how many guys did they leave runners in scoring? Because, like,
14.
how many? Yeah, like, I mean, like, there you go. Like, I mean, again, in a game like that, it just completely got out of hand. Maybe it doesn't change the result, but still, that's a little concerning, I think, for a team. Like you said, if you have some questions about the pitching in terms of, your day 3 starter and that kind of stuff, and if you have some of these guys out, that's one trend I think that may be, worth keeping an eye on in terms of potentially being in a spot there where, I don't know, maybe you just can't score enough runs and maybe you just can't take advantage of the opportunities the way you were in some of these other games, like we said, where you go back and you look at some of these strings of just impressive performances where they're putting up double-digit runs and all that. That to me is something that I thought really stood out in that game. But like we say too, sometimes, I mean, sometimes it is just a one-game type thing, and maybe it doesn't become a huge problem the rest of the way. But that was something I was looking at and thinking, okay, if you're in some of these, if you have some of these concerns in the areas elsewhere that you mentioned, you just you can't leave that many opportunities on the table there.
Yeah, I undercounted by 1. It was 15. I mean, usually in a game like that where you're getting runners on, people say, "Oh, well, are you worried about a team that's leaving a lot of runners on base?" I'm going, no, it's just the opposite to me. That points to the ability to get them on. And you have some nights like that where just crazy stuff happens. Like Georgia's not a home run hitting team. Well, hit 7 last night.
Right.
Usually you get, what was the number? I'll look it up here. They had 10 walks and 8 hits. And maybe 1 or 2 guys hit by pitch. And usually that gets you 7 or 8 runs, right? Yeah. And I'm not saying that to take anything away from Georgia, but some nights it just goes that way.
Yeah.
Vanderbilt had 19 runners on base, and usually that's good enough to score, like I said, 7, 8, 9 runs. It just didn't. But anyway, the injury thing is really what I'm watching for them. I'm more concerned about that for Vanderbilt than I am the fact they got beat by 12 and looked horrible, because Tim Corbin, I promise you, won't tolerate that for a second game.
Right.
And oh, by the way, Jack Leiter pitches tonight. But anyway, let's move on from baseball for a minute. Transfer portal stuff. Big development for Alabama yesterday, Blake.
Yeah, Alabama is. They're going to be really good next year, and that's kind of what we said. What was it? Probably 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago. I mean, we just said, look, Alabama and Arkansas are not going anywhere. Like, we just probably need to accept that, if we're talking about sort of the landscape of the SEC, Kentucky had a down year, and they'll be back up there. We know that. But I think you just go ahead and slot Alabama and Arkansas into the same category now in terms of their teams that I don't think are slipping below the top 4 or 5 in the SEC, at least in the short term, because I think those 2 coaches, Nate Oats and Eric Musselman, are doing such a good job with talent. And yes, yesterday Alabama got the not. It wasn't a surprise. I mean, this is someone that he had Alabama in his final list anyways before he chose Texas Tech. I think at one point there was a lot of momentum that Amari Burnett was going to pick Alabama, but then he went to Texas Tech. Now he winds up at Alabama. So I mean, it's just look, it's a former. I mean, this guy's a 5-star guard. He was just everyone was in love with him out of high school. Went to Texas Tech, decided to leave, and now here he is joining a group of guards next year for Alabama. That's just going to be, I mean, literally, they're going to potentially be. And I don't want to just put out a big statement here about how maybe they could be the best backcourt in the country, because I think you have to look at other teams and you have to compare and all this. But I mean, I don't think there's going to be any doubt that Alabama's probably going to have a chance to be one of the top 3 to 5 guard groups, backcourts in the entire country next year. Again, at worst to me, just based on looking at some of the others too out there. They're just going to be loaded. I mean, adding someone like that, I mean, they picked up Charles Bediako, 6'11" center from, just think about that. Like, that's sort of one of those elements to where they're going to have all this fantastic guard play, and you pick up, someone like that, Bediako, who's a 6'11", 215 type kid who's going to be able to do a lot of different things for them. I mean, he's always, I think he's a top 25 recruit, one of the best, centers in the country. And, they're adding another top 10 recruit in J.D. Davison, who's, a top 10, top point guard in the country. And they've got other guys with it. And it's just, I think you think about that and knowing what they're going to have coming back next season. Shackelford's going to be the guy that sort of leads the way. Quinterly, those type of guys. I mean, I don't know how many, somebody was making the joke about this yesterday. I don't know how many guards Alabama's going to play, but I mean, logistically, like, they could probably go 6-7 deep when you're just talking about guards. And that's, I think, the way that, Nate Oats wants to play it. And look, I said guards, but, we're talking wings and guys like that who can play some different positions on the perimeter. But their perimeter group is going to be very, very deep. And as I said, could be the deepest in the country, could be one of the deepest in the country, if not the best. And yeah, just adding Burnett to the group. I said yesterday, I think Alabama, without question, is probably going to be a preseason top 10 team next year. I think, some people may have even thought that I was slighting Alabama a bit when I said that. I think some actually think that they have a chance to be, a top 5 team, and they very well could, based on potentially adding another player to the mix. There's been a lot of momentum in terms of Alabama potentially also adding Noah Gurley, who comes over from Furman, someone, just another very, very talented player, a 6'8" kid who I think he's, just a rock solid player that would immediately, I want to say, I have to look up his numbers, but I want to say he averaged a pretty good, point total and that kind of stuff last year at Furman. I'm going to look it up right now, actually. Yeah, averaged 15.4 points per game, 6 rebounds per game. So think about it. If they were to add him to the mix, which I think that's the momentum right now, just based on what I've heard, they would. I mean, they literally could be a top 5 team in the country next year.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it sounds to me like that's our preseason number 1 in the league.
Yes, I would put them at the top. I think, you probably have the conversation with Kentucky and Arkansas to me for number 2. And then, from there, I think there's, stuff you'd have to look at. And obviously, again, where transfers matter. So it's a matter of seeing who potentially brings in what, I think, to the mix. But yeah, I think at this point, and again, especially if Alabama, even if they don't get Gurley, they're still, to me, probably the team to beat. But if they were to get him, I mean, they're a strong number 1 in the SEC to me, and I think it would be everyone else kind of chasing them again. So
I'm looking at verbal commits this morning. There are 1,278 players in the transfer portal, or maybe not in the portal, because many of these have landed. And how many guys have declared early for the draft on top of that?
Yeah, I'd say is a lot. So, which LSU, I mean, we had talked about that. I think their crew had, some of those guys have come out like Watford and Smart, and we expected that. So that's not a surprise in terms of those guys. So, yeah, that's another kind of interesting trend. But, too, and as we said, I mean, there could be some of these guys that come back in terms of, draft guys and all that. I mean, we talked about before, like, we expect guys like JT Thor at Auburn to probably come back, and all those other guys. So there's still a lot to be determined, and that's what I kind of said yesterday. I can say that Alabama's going to be, a preseason top 10 team, which I think they're pretty much locked in terms of their roster. But how you project them against other teams, at this point, it's really hard to know. Like, you could probably say, all right, well, I compare him to this team, although I don't know what this team's roster is going to look like next year. So there's just still a lot of movement to go. But I just don't think we're moving Alabama down anywhere. If anything, we're moving Alabama further up, I think, at this point, again, based on who they add. So.
Yeah, hard to bet against Nate Oats these days.
Yeah, they're just. Look, that's what it's about. He's got a very appealing style, and I think players saw that this year specifically. A lot of these guys that they brought in, like, they could tell that this is one of those things, and we all talked about it. I mean, it's just once that momentum gets rolling, once people realize you can have the type of success that they've had, I think they just immediately become a very appealing place to go, not just from the success standpoint, but from the style of play. And this is kind of that path that I think a lot of these players see is, okay, this is what's going to help me get to the NBA, have a chance to succeed. We're playing the type of style, which, we talked about with Corey Brewer. Like, it's very similar in terms of how Alabama wants to play and how NBA, teams and scouts and those kind of, people want to, the approach to the game is very similar now when you look at how Alabama plays and how things are played in the NBA. So yeah, these are all guys, like we said. I mean, you go down the list, these are all guys that Alabama's bringing in that a lot of them are going to have an opportunity to play at the next level. So they are loaded. They're going to be one of the deepest teams in the country. And they're going to be the preseason pick in the SEC, barring injury or anything like that. So.
While you were saying that, something you said sparked something I had seen on Twitter, so I spent a couple minutes to look it up, and I found it. This was what Aaron Torres tweeted yesterday. Transfer news, former McDonald's All-American and Texas Tech guard Namari Burnett commits to Alabama. Have told you for months. Kids watched how Alabama played this year, and now they all want to be part of it. Tide are and will continue to be kill it on the recruiting trail. Obviously, that was should have read killing it, but in any case, we get the message. And I just thought that tweet was when you said what you said. That's like, wait, I've heard this before somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's it really is. Like, it's just one of those things, and I feel like that was the thing we talked about as soon as they hired Nate Oats. We said, okay, this should really be a situation where they're going to have an opportunity that if they come out and just have some success, like, he's going to be able to recruit the type of players he wants to recruit just because the style of play is going to be so appealing to high school recruits or transfers, guys who maybe are looking for another place to play. And that's what we talk about. I mean, like, the Burnett thing, like, it's interesting, right? Because he initially, like, Alabama was right there on that potential list. Like, they were at the top. They were fighting with Texas Tech to land him. And now, yes, Texas Tech undergoes a coaching change, but I think this was something that was sort of decided before that in terms of him making this move. And I think if you're him, like, if you put yourself in his position and you look at how Alabama played, you're thinking, man, I really should have been there. Like, that fits my game. And that's what we said too. Like, Javon Quinterly's the perfect example. Went to play at Villanova, completely different style, slow it down, grind it out, type of game, more of a methodical type of approach, whereas he comes to Alabama. He struggled at Villanova, but he comes to Alabama and look at what he's done. So I think this is going to be an appealing place for every single, top guard. And as we're saying, it's not just guards, like, it's guys, that play other positions too, but perimeter type players. If you want to have a chance, I think, to have a lot of success going to Alabama, we've seen this too, right? Auburn, like, look at Auburn, like Sharif Cooper and all these other guys. Like, Auburn plays a similar type of style. And those are the things that have really helped both those programs kind of catapult themselves now into the national sphere, just because, hey, like, this is a very appealing way to play in this day and age. And I think, again, it also translates to how the NBA and the direction the NBA is moving in. So you're only going to see these guys, I think, recruit at this level moving forward, because I just think it's going to be something that's very appealing for all these top kids.
Okay, I'm looking at the portal and working backwards. Isaac McBride for Vanderbilt hit the portal yesterday. He had just transferred in last year from Kansas. He was Gatorade Mr. Basketball in the state of Arkansas 2 years ago. So he'll be on school number 3 wherever he lands. So that's 5 for Vandy in the portal. And I think we both expect Scottie Pippen Jr. to declare for the draft, too. So that's another roster reconfiguration that they'll need to do at Vanderbilt. Here's one, Tamati Kamara at Georgia. I don't know if we've talked about him. He landed somewhere yesterday. He landed at Dayton. Georgia's had a lot of attrition too, Blake. I mean, just when we talked about at the end of the season, hey, maybe things are looking up for Tom Crean, that has gone south in a hurry for him, I think. And I'm not sure that the defections there are over yet.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, they've got to be one that works the transfer portal and that type of stuff. I mean, we know, they're going to have a decent nucleus, I think, next season, but they've got to replace guys, and I think that you kind of look at where they stand in terms of, I don't know, like we've had that conversation about when does Georgia take that next step? Because if you look at it recruiting wise, right now they got a couple kids coming in just as recruits, but they aren't like top level kids. In terms of which, doesn't matter. I always say this, like the star ratings, it's great to look at, but they only give you one part of the story in terms of what these guys can do. But I mean, right now, if you just look at their 2021 class, like they're, in the top 70, like that's kind of where they're at. So I think for him, it's just, I mean, they do, like they've got to work the transfer portal very hard to try to bring, some guys in that are going to be able to help them, to give them an opportunity. Some of those teams at the bottom, like you said, are just, I think, very interesting. Like you talked about Vanderbilt. We know, they're going to have some help coming in, not immediately, but they'll have some help coming in after that. But I don't know. Like I'm very curious to see kind of what the direction is for some of those programs. We've already talked a lot about South Carolina. That's another one that I think is going to be very interesting to see kind of what next season looks like, knowing the coaching situation and all that, and sort of the tension I think that's there. With multiple parties. So I think those teams at the bottom, going to be interesting to see kind of how things look for them heading into next season, because as we've said, they're all losing players too. And that's not necessarily what you want if your team's at the bottom trying to work your way up. So
South Carolina added A.J. Wilson from George Mason, who had some moments there and played less down the stretch. I guess he's a grad transfer because he spent 4 years there. That happened yesterday. Florida, here's one we haven't talked about. The Gators have added some players too, Blake.
Yeah, Florida's added. I'm trying to think. I've got to look at the list.
Marion Jones.
Yeah, I was going to say
that was the one yesterday.
Yeah, they added him. They've done a pretty good job. Florida has, in terms of, that's what we say is, if you're losing some of these guys, which as we talked about with Florida, Omar Payne, Noah Locke, we know the situation. Trey Mann, all this head to the NBA. Like you got a lot to replace there in your Florida, and as we said. Also, for Florida, it's going to be a big year for Mike White, and we've said that in terms of what they're going to have to do and maybe what the expectations are. I think they also picked up from Kansas City, Brandon McKissick. He's someone that was a pretty good guard there for Kansas City too. And I think, it's going to be interesting because we always talk about the fit, and I forgot too, they also got C.J. Felder. That was another guy that they landed. So Florida's roster is going to look different, but I think it's, how do things come together? Because I feel like it's going to be a pretty interesting season there for Mike White, even though, they pretty much come out and said, hey, we're happy with this guy, long term, like we feel like he's the one. But we know, we've talked about the frustrations with the fan base and all that, because they feel like they should have had an opportunity to go further in some of these seasons. This season, I think, would be, I don't know. We said we kind of throw out this season because just based on the whole Keontae Johnson thing. But Florida's another interesting one. I think actually we just had another transfer, which, of course, right, as we're recording, E.J. Anosike at Tennessee. I can't say that's surprising. He didn't play a whole lot.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And Jones, Penn State was a team last year. The record wasn't good. They were never going to get in the tournament because there were too many losses, but the computers loved them. I don't know if they wound up top 50 in KenPom, but they were there for a while. Jones, I don't know if he was their leading scorer, got 15.3 points a game, put up some decent steals numbers. I mean, that's one that, and he shot it almost 40% from three. I mean, that's a really good transfer for Mike White. Shot 78% from the line. I think that's one that he was one I think a lot of people would have loved to had.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, it's just, can you put all the pieces to the puzzle together and kind of, because as we said, right? Because if you're Florida, no matter who's on the roster right now, like we're probably not going to rank Florida ahead of Alabama. We're not going to rank them ahead of Kentucky. Probably not going to rank them ahead of Arkansas. Then I think, you're right there in that group of, okay, how can we jump how can we jump those teams? And I wonder, like, what does next season look like for Florida? They'll wind up being one of the most fascinating teams, I think, heading into next season. They'll probably be a team that's pretty hard to place, just based on, as we said, we know they've got talent coming in, but how does it all come together? So yeah, I would circle Florida as one of those teams that's probably going to be right there as one of those ones that we're not exactly sure what to do with heading into next season.
We went into this podcast today going, what are we going to talk about today? Because there was one baseball game, but the transfer portal, it just always delivers, doesn't it?
Yep. I mean, it's just, that's just, again, as we said, I mean, literally as we started recording, you have another guy transfer, and it's just, it doesn't stop with this thing. And and look, we're basically 1 week into April. Like, we're far from done with this transfers thing. Like, there's still going to be guys moving here and there. And I think at least at this point, the coaching carousel kind of slowing down a bit. So I think at least maybe you have a little bit more, stability there in terms of new guys coming in, trying to keep players, and maybe don't have as many guys leaving, but still, we're what? I mean, we're not even a week removed from the national championship game. And so you still, I think, going to have a lot of movement out there.
I know we've talked about Arkansas, but did we talk specifically about Chris Likes? Again, there's so many of these guys. Like, you can't even keep. I mean, Likes was a 15, yes. 16-point a game scorer at Arkansas. I mean, at Miami.
Yeah, Likes is he's a huge addition for them. They picked up the Tony kid from Pitt. That's another huge one for Arkansas. That's what I kind of threw them into that category and saying, I think they're going to be right there again. In terms of having, a chance to compete for the SEC title, even though I think it's still going to be Alabama's to lose. But yeah, I mean, picking up Chris Likes, I mean, and look, Musselman better than anyone, right? Like, we know he works the transfer portal just in a masterful way. And I've said that so many times, how they do it. Everyone should follow the same blueprint in terms of what they do in the transfer portal, because more often than not, they hit home runs when they are in the transfer portal versus, they do their due diligence on guys and understand that they are going to either fit their system or how these guys are going to fit into the mix. So I think by adding, Likes coming in, you've got Tony coming in from Pitt. We know they're going to have, Devo Davis coming back and just a good nucleus they're going to have. And by the way, we know that Muss is not done either. They're still going to bring in some other players too. So it's, Arkansas not going anywhere, Alabama not going anywhere. This is just kind of the landscape now. And it's good for the SEC, right? Because we always say it. This is what the SEC's been wanting, or people just, from the casual fan, it's always been about Kentucky. Well, as we've seen for probably the past 4 or 5 years now, things have headed in a direction to where there's so many other teams getting in on the action. And that's not even to talk about, a team like Auburn, who I think is going to jump right back up after having, a different season this year. I think they'll be right back up there in the top 5 or so, top 6 maybe. And then, it's just, this is why it's so hard coaching-wise in this league. Because you look at some of these teams, you're thinking, that team should be pretty good, but how do I put them above 7th or 8th in the SEC? And then that becomes the expectation for a lot of other schools. It's like, okay, when does 8th place or 9th place or 10th not become good enough anymore? Even if you're still a pretty decent team, it's just you're dealing with a mammoth now in this league to where, you potentially have 5 or 6 top 25 teams going into the season. Whereas before, you were lucky to get 4 or 5 teams into the NCAA tournament.
If you want a good laugh, the verbal commits server crashed for a couple of minutes while we were talking about transfers.
I can't say I'm surprised with that. So it's probably not the first time, probably not the last time. So.
Yeah, I wonder if the coaches crashed it or what that was.
But so somebody big must have hit the portal, because all the coaches went running there, and there you go. So
anything else as we wrap up today? By the way, next week we'll start to shift to some ball and draft talk, and I know people are probably dying for that. We've done a good job of covering what's in front of us, which marches with the start of SEC baseball and of course the tournament. That's where we want to go. I think there are places you can go to get spring football and draft coverage completely at the exclusion of baseball and basketball in this league, and that's kind of why we're here, among other things. But just to let folks know, we are going to start shifting gears towards that.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing is local beat writers do such a great job, covering spring football and that's the kind of stuff is we, as a general SEC thing, like we, as you mentioned, we're able to hit what's in front of us, but like we can't be at every spring practice, we can't do all those other things right now, so it's like take advantage of that. You get your nuggets from the local beat writers, and then like you said, we got plenty of time to talk football, so we're gonna definitely start kind of taking that up a notch. Starting next week, and yeah, it's just been a lot going on with basketball and baseball, and yeah, so now we add football to the mix, and yeah, it's gonna be another fun season for sure. So,
Blake, you want to close us out today with any parting thoughts?
No, just check out everything southeastern14.com. Lots of stuff over there, all our baseball coverage, basketball, football stuff. So yeah, check everything out over there, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at 14 Southeastern.
Yeah, we will keep you updated with weekend baseball action. Very excited about the weekend ahead in SEC baseball. In any case, remember to subscribe to the podcast where you get them. Rate and review us if you don't mind, please. That helps us get found. You can check our Twitter feed out at 14southeastern.com, or you can just go to southeastern14.com, see all our content for free, and you can also get our podcast for free there too. You can get our podcast free anywhere, but if you want to keep track of where everything is, go to southeastern14.com. In any case, we'll be back Monday with another podcast. We will have written content throughout the weekend as stuff happens in baseball or anything else for that matter. In any case, he's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the 14. We will see you again on Monday.